Well, good morning and welcome to another little video. This one, I guess all these videos come from some kind of inner prompt. Just sort of wake up in the morning and you get a sense of what to do or what to present or how to extend the certainty of love's message outward as a vibrational resonance, let's say, that can be picked up or and then returned via, in this case, on social media comments and likes and whatever, which I'm unconcerned about either way, positive or negative, but they're always useful in seeing any emotional trigger or reaction that I have. So in a sense, these videos that I make and present are learning tools for me or healing tools for me. Me being in the higher sense, as in I, because we're all connected, and what helps one helps all, and healing is shared. So today's video is going to be about the group called Extinction Rebellion, or more importantly about the environment, because there's a lot of concern on both sides, on both camps, about the environment of the world and whether climate change science is real or whether it's been concocted, and is it just a naturally occurring cyclical happening, etc. And I don't really have a particular point of view on either side, although at one time in my life, having been what I would guess people would call today a greenie, and been to protests and shut down a mine and saved a forest and all of that in collaboration with thousands of other people, I guess I would like to say in that regard that you don't shit in your own backyard. You know, like, it makes no sense to pollute the world, even though from now a spiritual perspective of there being no world, it being a fabrication of the mind, a projection of consciousness. I don't have such views per se, and the use that I see in the world as a platform for the teaching, learning scenario of souls coming in to undergo the particular stage of the journey of their soul is the only true purpose that I see for the world. So I guess in that case, having the world remain viable as a place where bioorganic life can continue to exist for a moment in the, what would you call it, in the joint venture experience of salvation, or the joint venture experience of enlightenment, wherein the time that it takes for the alpha and the omega of the individual and collective consciousness can be brought together at that vanishing point, or at that black hole point in the mind, to achieve a total awakening, or across the board spiritual awakening, which is happening now around the world. So whilst I understand the nature of protesters who are protesting what would you call it, the industrialization of the planet, I guess, and the rape and exploitation of its resources for profit and gain, I also understand that at no tick of the clock soon is that process going to come to a finalization in any regard, until we come up with completely viable and alternatives for fuel, for food, and all the other prerequisites that first world, second world and third world nations require. And from my own meditative endeavors, I can absolutely guarantee you that for my own self, I'm a very late time association, early in time, and that means that I have achieved in my own mind a level of consciousness and an experience or experiences that show me particular things about the nature of the world, the nature of self, and the messages that I present through these videos, etc., are extensions of the certainty of my mind based on those. And one of those certainties is that, and you don't have to believe any of this that I'm telling you, it's just my own understanding. You can pursue your own enlightenment wholeheartedly and come to the same conclusions as I have and the same realizations. But the primary one of those is, pardon me, that the world is old and tired and without hope. Now that doesn't mean, oh well, if the world's all old and tired and without hope, we can just go on trashing it. Obviously not. I mean, use common sense. And as I already mentioned, there are souls still incarnating here, having the experience of the journey of their soul in this particular episode of, let's say, evolutionary consciousness, wherein ego mind is being retrained and reawakened to the whole, to universal consciousness. And that's a very important thing. So it's important that the world remain viable, as I said, for as long as possible. And if you were to look out into the universe and see how many dead, dying and transitioning planets there are, and take into account the nature of life in the temporal realm as being transitory and being temporary, you'll understand that this world, the next world, whatever world that we seem to incarnate on time and again, it's not the first time we've done this. It's not the first episode of human conscious evolution that we've embarked upon, or the first experiment in salvation, in the rescue effort of mind to mind, or the awakening of what seems to sleep to what never slept. I don't know if that makes sense. You kind of have to have your own enlightenment experience to understand the nature of truth. And when you understand the nature of truth, which is not ambiguous, there's not a truth for you and a truth for me, it's one singular truth, you'll understand completely that you're not from here. This world is not your home, and despite your best efforts to adjust to it and keep it as you like it and all of these things, it's never going to work. And all those planets that are dead out there whizzing around, there's billions and trillions of them, are testimony to the longevity of time and the corruption of time upon the temporal association. So being without hope, of course, is kind of depressing if you do not see that hope comes from within you. And you can only associate hope with true purpose. And true purpose comes from a willingness to participate in a, let's say, in a universal curriculum that has the greater good of the whole at mind, not the greater good of these scientists or those scientists or these protesters or these naysayers, but the greater good of the whole. And whilst we imagine, and whilst we think, and whilst we assume that the beneficence of the planet and its health organically is perhaps the greatest threat facing mankind at the time, or the greatest issue facing mankind at the time, I can assure you that that's wrong. The greatest threat facing mankind at the moment is its own deliberate denial mechanism, which we call ego association or ego mind, that would have it convince the individual and the collective that it is separate from the whole, and that its destiny is to grow old and sick and die along with everyone else, which makes no sense. What is the purpose of life if we are to flourish as a conscious mind, enabling self-observation and self-awareness, just to die at the end into the eternal blackness of nothing? And while some people do believe in that, having had experiences that show me that there are realms and dimensions beyond this one, in a transitioning ladder of reassociative participation that every mind will engage in through bardo states if you're a Buddhist, and through the ongoing process of resurrection, I can guarantee you that life is eternal and whole and perfect, and you are part of that as spirit. And I remember trying to present these ideas through the Council of the Rainbow Tribe many, many years ago, and anyone who hasn't got an understanding of the Rainbow Tribe, which is a kind of a fulfillment or a prophecy presented through the Hopi Indian sages and seers of hundreds of years ago. The effect, or the what would you call it, the profundity of the message that I had to present at that time was still a new kind of thing to me, having recently only had my awakening back in 1997. And I think the first gathering here was at Om Shalom in 2000 in Australia, which was a beautiful time. But I am well aware that the message I presented was received with a small amount of welcome, a small amount of warmth, because at that time the focus of that particular gathering in part was the coming together of the 12 tribes to form the 13th, which is the one. And also there was a splintering interest, which was the demonstration against the Ross mining group, who were spilling cyanide into the Clarence River and causing the die-off of thousands and thousands of fish, and the inability of the water of that river to be used for irrigating crops and you know, for having cattle drink from it, etc. So, and that was a successful protest for all you greenies, and you know, that was a walk the streets, wave the placards. That was hands on. And I still have great memories of the joining and the sense of family and everything that was involved in that for a common purpose. But nowadays my sense of common purpose is of a higher regard, and the message I present more overwhelming and more, I guess, more urgent, because it can be millions of years between incarnations and millions of years between the blossoming of a level of consciousness through an evolutionary process, which has to happen that way in time and space for mind to begin to participate, you know. And whilst all time is simultaneous, happening at once, and we are reviewing mentally only what has already gone by, the certainty of the fact that time is always against us is a common factor throughout all of that reckoning, throughout all of that understanding that everything is a singular moment, and we are collapsing that time that it took for the alpha and the omega of time, 130 billion years since the Big Bang, and just as much, if not more, to come. And it's like that suffering, the suffering, or the idea of suffering and the potential contained within that is, you know, if you think you're suffering now, hang on. If you think you have existential angst now, hang on. And that's something also that I wanted to present too, was in this video, that the nature of existentialism is what it is that forces the ego mind to look outward into a world of cause and effect relationships, to try and project onto situations that it has given meaning to the cause of its existentialism, the cause of its anxiety, the cause of its depression, etc. But all of that existentialism comes from not knowing what I am, not knowing what I am in the higher sense. And so answering those questions for oneself, embarking with heart and mind and soul and everything on the spiritual path in the removal of the blocks to the presence of love's awareness within us, is paramount. It's the prime focus of human consciousness today. The prime focus. And if you can hear that, if you can hear me tell you that, I'm not telling you not to go out and protest about things. I'm not telling you to try and debunk the protesters. I'm telling you to change your focus entirely for a moment and look at the big picture. Look at the overall life, the universe, and everything picture, including the entirety of the universal association of consciousness in it. All right, well, if you didn't have enough on your plate already, I'm sure I just added some food for thought there. But it is food for thought that will alleviate you from the necessity to have concern for what's going on outside, and to see that change which must occur from within first for change to happen out there is more important than what it is you believed may have been important. And I'm not saying that it's separate from the importance that you've given it, but when you can see life, the universe and everything from the top of the pyramid, there being nothing higher than the top of the pyramid, you'll understand that it makes sense to operate from the top down rather than to operate somewhere from within it, not knowing what's above and not being able to see what has happened below, right? And we tend to get caught up in the idea of Illuminati and globalization as motivating factors for what is happening below, and that's not true. It goes much deeper than that, and I don't want to get into biblical stuff here. I'm much more inclined to look at the nature of quantum physics as being matter and antimatter, or particle and antiparticle, in a kind of a schism there, you know, where and if you've seen the twin slits experiment, I can explain that completely and easily, and apparently there's a Nobel Prize for anyone who can, but I have no use for Nobel Prizes. I'm far more concerned, and yes, I know I'll get a few quantum physicists now, probably people interested. Can you explain it to me? It's very simple, but I'm far more concerned about the nature of the removal of the blindness, the removal of the blocks to to the awareness of love's presence within the individual and the collective, which then sends out a universal signal, a universal vibration. It's like, I need help in this. And if you think you might want to help, the greatest help that I can recommend to you at the moment on this planet is to go and get yourself a copy of A Course in Miracles. Start reading it and start doing the workbook lessons, and begin to undo the consciousness, or the curriculum of consciousness that you've taught yourself through the judgmental use, or the erroneous judgmental use of the ego mind, and learn to reuse that judgmental associative way of thinking for one that considers the whole in all its actions beyond the nature of the temporal realization. So enjoy the journey.